All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and resume our conference with another stellar lineup of industry professionals. And so I hope that you all enjoyed our first panel as we talked about the importance of skills for career in sports, but also, as importantly, character. And so, next we're going to talk about building your team, the ABCs of networking. And so I found in my experience of working with students and just people in general is that networking can be a little bit scary. People hear a lot about why it's important, how important it is to network, but oftentimes they don't hear enough to encourage them to really get out there and do it because it could be scary and it could be a little bit complicated too. And so in this next panel, we have some industry leaders who've done their fair share of networking to get to where they are, and they're going to share just some tried and true advice about how to better network into the industry. So networking authentically as your true self. And it's important to be able to show up as who you are. And networking, it's tempting to try to impress somebody, but you got to be who you are. Networking bravely. So even though it may be a little scary to meet somebody who's an executive in the industry, but being able to take that courage and build up the courage to network bravely and networking competently. So there are right ways to network. And so they're also going to share how to network competently the right way. So let's go ahead and get into some introductions. And so first of all, I want to introduce Ashley Adamson. She's the lead host and reporter for the Pac-12 networks. And Ashley, are you there by chance?
I am here. Hey, everybody.
Terrific, Ashley. Thank you and welcome. And then next we have Ben Odom, who's the Vice President of Business and Legal Affairs for NASCAR. Welcome, Ben, and good to see you again.
Hey, Ron. Thanks for the invite.
Certainly. And then we have Dan Staley, who's the Director of Social Media for Major League Soccer. And Dan, are you on by chance?
Hey, everybody. It's great to be here.
Hi, Dan. Thanks and welcome. Derek McKenna, he's the agent for CAA Hockey, Creative Artists Agency, of course. And welcome, Derek. Good to see you.
Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.
Certainly. And then we have Kevin Moss, who's the Director of Community Affairs for Major League Baseball. And Kevin, are you on by chance?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, Kevin, thank you and welcome. And then Matt Lenio, who's the Vice President of Global Partnerships and Media Sales for Monumental Sports and Entertainment. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Certainly. And then Seth Rubenroit, who's a manager of content integrations and audio for NBC Sports. And Seth, welcome and good to see you again.
Hey, Ron. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Certainly. And last but not least, Thomas Warren, who's a senior podcast producer for NFL Media. Welcome, Tom.
Appreciate you guys having me.
Certainly. All right. So networking. So I wanted to ask you all to let's start off by talking networking authentically. And so, as I mentioned, it's important for people, I personally think, to show up as their real selves, but oftentimes we're networking, you really want to make a good impression on somebody. So sometimes people manufacture a persona or they come across as, disingenuous. And so how would you advise students on how they can network with people like you more authentically? And anybody can jump in to tackle that.
I'm happy to start.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, showing up to opportunities like this, everybody who's here obviously understands the importance of networking and being able to get advice and learn and glean different, observations from people who have been in the business for a while. So you guys understand it. I think that the biggest thing to me for networking, and it's hard. I remember being in college and everyone says, well, it's all about relationships and networking. And it is like this, any business that you want to get into, whether it's the sports side, whether it's the broadcasting side, the business, whatever, it is about relationships and the people who you know, and the business is very small. So my advice in terms of how to show up authentically to me, I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to be yourself and you have to be vulnerable. And I think we try and pretend like we have all the answers and that we want to show up as these professionals who are ready to start. And we've got all these resumes and reels. And I think when you truly connect with someone, you're basically saying, hey, I want to be where you are one day, or I want to learn what you've learned. What can you teach me? So I think being vulnerable and being able to ask questions and understand that you don't have all the answers is point one. And another thing I would say is just be consistent. People who you are probably trying to network with have a lot going on in their day. And a lot of people who are probably trying to connect with them. I'm sure every single person on this panel today and throughout the day have a lot going on. So be consistent and be patient. If you don't hear back from them the first time, give it a little while and reach out to them again. And I think the one thing too that sorry, I've got a bunch of things. I'll stop and pass the baton here in a second. But I think the other big key is doing your research. I can't tell you how many times I get on a call with somebody for the first time and they're asking me questions that are available with a 3-second Google search. So take the time that you get with somebody if they say yes to an informational interview very seriously, and have really specific questions tailored to their experience in that background. Because when somebody is asking me informed questions and I can tell that they've spent a little bit of time on the internet and have researched my background instead of, well, where did you go to college? And where was your first job? You can get it to the heart of advice a lot faster. So those are some things that I think are critical, but it is about being yourself and just being not afraid to ask questions and then follow up, when you feel like it's appropriate. So I'll stop there because I'm sure I've got a lot more, but I know we don't have time, so I'll pass the baton.
Great stuff, Ashley. Thank you. Great way to start us off too.
Can I jump in real quick?
Oh yeah, Thomas. I'm sorry. Real quick. Ashley, I love that word vulnerability, and so I'm glad you mentioned that. But yeah, Thomas. Yeah, please feel free to jump in.
No, I think that's Ashley hit everything on the head. I was just going to add 2 points to what she mentioned. One is to being vulnerable is being proactive, not being afraid to put yourself out there, especially in the media business. You have to do that. So don't be afraid to be proactive. And then the second point to Ashley's point about having questions is when you're going into meetings with someone that you want to talk to, yes, do your research and know about them. And also just have things that you want them to know about you. First question I ask everyone I talk to is, well, what do you want to do? And if you can't answer that basic question, and it's like, well, I can't help you figure out where you want to go. But if you have, not to say you have to have it exactly mapped out, but if you have a vision of what it is you want to do, then, okay, that helps me in thinking, or the person that you're talking to, that helps them know what it is you're about, what do you want to do, and they can do what mentors do. They guide you in that direction. So I'd say have an awareness of what you want to do, and be able to ask that simple question in the start of a meeting, and then have a good 3 to 4 ideas that you want to discuss with that person. Because like Ashley mentioned, it's not that the people that you talk to don't want to talk to you, they're busy. And it's really just a nudge, because I'm sure once you reach out to someone, it's like, yes, we want to help you. So reach out. And then when you have that call, be the person that kind of leads it. If you can have 3 or 4 action items that you want to discuss, and that helps us in the conversation to make it be more solution driven and something that you can look forward to or move forward on. So I'd say have ideas, be proactive, put yourself out there, and be able to answer that basic question of what it is you want to do.
Great stuff, Thomas. Thank you for adding that too. And so anybody else want to share any more just in terms of how students could be more authentic and how true to themselves when they're networking?
Yeah, I can share a couple of things, Ron. I think first, Ashley talked about networking can be scary. And I think it is a little bit intimidating sometimes when you're new to networking. I think one thing that's really important to understand is that everybody that you're trying to interact with, everybody that you're trying to engage with that is, further advanced in their careers, they've all started at some point. They were all entry level. They were all getting into the game. And there's been people along their paths that have helped them get to where they're at now. So a lot of those leaders throughout the industry are very willing to help. So I think that you have to go in with that mindset that there are people that are willing and definitely able and to help you out. One of the things also that I think is really important is not necessarily just to push your own agenda, but to really kind of learn more about them and really kind of turn your focus to that person. So finding out like what led them to get to where they're at, what are the steps that help them, advance their careers. And I think that is just as valuable as hurrying and, more valuable, much more important than you kind of giving them a really condensed version of your resume in just a short period of time of talking to them. It's finding out more about them. That's really going to give you a lot of, I think, education to help you advance your own careers.
Great stuff, Matt. Thank you for sharing that. Does anybody else want to add it to what's been shared already about networking authentically?
I think just one more thing I would add here, and great points by everybody so far. I mean, don't be afraid to lean into what you're passionate about, even if it may seem, random or bizarre, or maybe you're not sure if this person might, understand it. I think we want to see what you're enthusiastic about. We want to hear about the things you care about and maybe passion projects or side projects or things where you've explored it a little further. And you can never be sure if someone you know or talking to also shares that same concept or passion with you. And I think that can take the conversation to a much deeper level in a faster period of time. And just communicating your excitement to discuss this area, whatever it may be, with whoever you're speaking with, that really shines through. And then just go back to the vulnerability aspect, just to reiterate, nobody's ever going to fault you for opening up about questions or roadblocks or maybe some obstacles that you're facing if you're trying to break into the industry in a certain area or learn more about it. Asking somebody, hey, I've been wanting to get into this area, but I've been struggling with this. I think being vulnerable is just a way to be more authentic. And everybody you talk to is going to appreciate your honesty and the curiosity that you bring, which I think is the most important thing to offer.
Terrific. Thank you. So Kevin or Seth, anything to add to what's been shared about, Ben, about networking authentically?
I would say, don't forget that the people that you're trying to network with are actually people. It's very easy to kind of get caught up into being professional and wanting a job and showing that enthusiasm, and that's all great stuff. But if someone is talking to me, if I'm speaking to someone younger and they ask me about my kids, like, I light up and it shows, and that can break the ice. Asking someone where they're from, where they grew up, and just building that rapport and relaxing the conversation can really be helpful to get to know the person, and they can share something with you that is that sets them apart. So when you follow up with them and say, hey, how's your son doing in soccer? That can, bring that light bulb, like, oh, okay, I remember this person when you do follow up. So, don't forget that people are people and they do have lives outside of work, and that can set you apart.
Thank you, Kevin. And that's important because sometimes we forget that and we just tend to deify people, but yeah, people are people. All right.
Ron, Ron, I wish I'd answered before Kevin, because I think he was going exactly where I was going, in that from an authenticity standpoint is it's not, at least the most successful networking sessions I've had, they may not necessarily be limited to one session. And it is, you're getting to know who you're networking with and they're getting to know you too. So it should be a bit of a two-way street. It's not, I've never looked at them as kind of the, hey, you happen to get on the elevator with the CEO, so you've got, a 2-minute elevator ride to pitch your resume. It's true, like Kevin said, it's like, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself and why did you do this? And how can I, and well, here's what I'd like to do. And it could be the first of several conversations where you do get to know each other. And then that's where the networking that turns into a real relationship, that's where I've had the most success. And it lets me, I'm kind of an introverted guy. And so having that over a couple of courses and getting to know each other a little bit, it helps me take my walls down, and then to Ashley's point, become a bit more vulnerable as we go. And now I'm a little bit more comfortable about talking about, hey, I'm not having success here. I'm struggling with this. How did you overcome this? I've had a lot more success doing that as I've gotten to know the person, to Kevin's point a little bit. So just, I thought Kevin was spot on with at least how I look at it.
Terrific, Ben. Yeah, and I appreciate you adding that too, just those relationships and just getting to know somebody and having them get to know you. And it takes time, too. Seth, anything to add to all the great things that have been shared so far?
Yeah, I love what Ben just said. I mean, you find yourself in the elevator with the executive, to somebody that you want to talk to, not just, throwing out your pitch, but just kind of getting to know them as a person. Where I see that the most is if I'm going into a meeting with a bunch of big executives at NBC, the first thing everybody always does is pull out their phone or pull up a computer and send off one last email. But if you just say like, hey, here's the CMO of NBC, like, let me get to know them and ask them about their kids. It makes them be like, oh, I know the Seth guy, he's also got a dog, whatever it is, rather than just that kind of anonymous person that's sitting next to you just on their phone in a meeting. So, it doesn't even have to look like networking, but just make an authentic human connection and try and get to know that person that you bump into in an elevator or sit next to at a conference or whatever it happens to be.
Terrific. Great stuff. I feel like we get almost into the section here because you guys put out so much stuff here, but just a few things that came to mind. So being vulnerable, that vulnerability is so key. Making an authentic human connection, realizing that the people that you're networking with are people, not afraid to lean into who you are and what you're passionate about. Getting to know your network, it's a two-way relationship. So those are definitely things that I honed in on, but also other pieces of advice, being consistent, doing your research, being proactive, understanding that the people that you're networking with started out at the entry level themselves, focusing on that person, other person too, I think is really great. So a lot of great stuff that was shared. So our next question I wanted to ask, and I think we've already kind of touched on it to a certain bit in terms of you addressing network authentically, but I just want to put it out there to see if anybody wants to add anything. But next, I wanted to just touch on networking bravely. And I think it could be somewhat connected, but anything else you want to add to help students to figure out how to be more courageous in networking, or do you feel like we've already covered it, what's been shared?
I'll share something, Ron. I think in order to do it bravely, it's kind of like when you prepare for a test. If you do your homework, if you do your research beforehand, you're more confident. And the same thing goes, I know we talked a little bit about it already, but when you do research on the people that you're going to be speaking with in advance, it's going to help you ask them, I think, better questions. And when you're able to ask them better questions, you're able to get so much more out of your time with them. There was not too long ago, I read an article on Harvard Business Review that was talked about moving from small talk to deep talk. And it was kind of also changing the type of questions that you ask. So instead of saying something like, what is your current role? I mean, you already know what their current role is. It's talking to them like, what do you enjoy most about your current role? Or what are some of the challenges that you come up with? Or, asking them a little bit deeper questions to get more out of it. And then in doing that, I think both you and the person that you're speaking with get so much more out of your time together.
Terrific, Matt. Thank you very much. Yeah, and that research is key in the preparation in terms of helping you to feel more confident. But yeah, I like that. I looked that up, the article. So moving from small talk to deep talk. Okay.
I'll add something to what Matt just said. If you're lucky enough to bump into Matt at a conference, and you go up to him and say, "Hey, what does Monumental Sports and Entertainment do?" Like that just shows that you don't know what Monumental Sports and Entertainment is, and I think that's really embarrassing. But if you read Sports Business Journal, you read Sportico, and you say, "Hey, Matt, I saw that you guys just acquired NBC Sports Washington. Why are you guys leaning in on the RSN business?" Or, "Hey, Matt, I saw in Sports Business Journal that you guys are looking to acquire the Washington Nationals. Why pivot into owning more sports?" You ask higher level questions like that, it's going to make the conversation go better, and it's going to make you look smarter, like you know what you're talking about.
Great. And Seth, I just love how you gave those real life examples. That's terrific. That's something students can really sink their teeth into. Okay, good stuff. All right, anybody else have anything else that they want to add to networking bravely, or do we need to move on?
Yeah, I'll touch on that too, just because I really like that point, and I think it speaks to the fact that it's not just an isolated meeting, that it's a relationship over time. And one of the best things that you can do is follow up, follow through, and find ways to stay in touch with people where you're, referencing something that they just happened, check the news, or, whether it's about them personally, the organization. I think anything you can do to continue to show that you're interested and doing your research and all that, it's huge. So that's a huge component of it too. But I think to your original question, just understanding that networking is a learned skill. It's not something that you're necessarily born with. Some people are better at it than others from the get-go, but it is something that everyone has to work on, all of us included. And it's just about starting somewhere. So, in terms of the courage to do it, just get going, just start somewhere. I think that's the easiest way to look at it.
That's terrific stuff, Derek. Yeah, I love that, understanding, that networking is a learned skill. And like I said, some people are naturally better at it, but everyone has to learn to a certain degree, and just starting where you are. Great stuff. All right. Thank you for weighing in on that. So next one is networking competently. So networking the right way. So once again, I think you all shared some things early on that touched on how to network the right way. But is there anything else that you think the students should know about whether it's networking on LinkedIn and networking in person, maybe what the best ways are to network so that you don't, so you can make the best impression?
I can jump in just real quick with a point. To everyone's point that it's an ongoing relationship. You don't want to call somebody in your network only when just because you need something. It should be a back and forth. It should be like everyone's saying, if you're having a conversation and you're not calling this person because you need them to connect you to get an interview for something that you're doing. It should be a relationship. So think of it that way, and not just how can this person help me get something? Because that will very quickly show up, and you don't want that, right? You're trying to build a network, and I think that's, to everyone's point that we've been saying throughout, is being authentic, knowing about that person, but also think of it as a relationship and not just a means to get something out of someone. I think that's a huge factor in networking.
Great stuff, Thomas. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I would.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would agree with that. Sorry, I would agree with that 100%. Sometimes just sending an email, or if you have the person's cell phone, a text like, hey, or LinkedIn or whatever, just reaching out to say Happy New Year or Happy Holidays, that can go a long way, because you're not always reaching out wanting something, and that goes further in terms of building that personal relationship.
Thank you. Ashley?
Yeah, I was just going to underscore both of those points. I think checking in on remembering that they're a human being and checking in on them. And in terms of like practical things to do, one thing that has been so helpful to me, I read something the other day that stuck in my head. It was something like, the most beautiful sound to someone is the sound of their own name. And the only thing sweeter than that is the sound of one of their loved ones' names. Remembering, obviously, people's names, but their kids' names. If they shared something with you that was personal because you asked a great question. I have a Google document that I started during COVID, when everything was a little bit up in the air and I didn't really know if I was going to still be the Pac-12, if I was going to get out of the business. I was looking at PR, all sorts of things. And I made a conscious decision that every single day I was going to reach out and try and have a call with one person. And so I have a Google Doc with just who that person is, like, a link to their LinkedIn or whatever I found with them on the internet, and then just notes from our conversation. And I keep it all in one place. And I have gone back and referenced that hundreds of times. And not only are there so many gold nuggets just laying in those, notes, but it allows me to be more intentional about following up, because you never want to just have one conversation and then never talk to that person again, which I have totally been guilty of. A lot of this advice that I'm giving is things that I've learned through trial and error, and now being on the other side of it. But being able to reference and ask about someone's kids. I mean, even in my phone, if I have someone's contact, I always try and put their spouse's name and their kids' names if I know them or if I can find them. If I'm talking to a coach or players, I just want to remember something that makes it feel like, yeah, I care about you. I'm not just trying to, get something from you. So I think that is a huge point. And I think being able to have a document where you keep it all can allow you to be a little bit more intentional and just keep notes sort of going. The other thing I would say from just an important thing to do from a technical standpoint, I will get out on every soapbox that I can for the rest of my life and talk about the value of thank you notes. Emails are great and totally suffice, especially if it's a phone conversation, but I can count on probably two hands the number of handwritten thank you notes that I've gotten after I've met with someone. To include, I've even had people send me, Starbucks gift cards or whatever, and just say, hey, I know your time is valuable, and I just want to say thank you. And I remember those people, and it's so meaningful. I have a good friend, Pete Thamel, who a lot of you may know now. He's at ESPN, but has had a long writing, sports writing career. And he said, my friends and I always joke that the whole reason that I made it in this business is because I'm the only guy who is above the age of 30 who writes handwritten thank you notes. So he writes everything. So I will get yourself, invest in some nice stationery with your name on it. And just as soon as you are able to, have a call with somebody or get a chance, if you have time, just have those handy and send a note, because it really makes your day. And then it makes you think about them later. It's another point of contact. So those are two things. But I just got to say, I love I'm on this panel, but I just love what everyone is saying. I've written down like 30 more things. So again, I'll stop now, but this is, I imagine everyone's getting a lot out of this because there's some great gold in here.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. And I concur too. You all have been fantastic. And I always love when people bring up the thank you notes and having thank you notes too, because we try to encourage students to do that. It's not only a courtesy, but also separates you from others. But also I love that best practice of that Google document and being able to take notes from your conversation so you can remember and to be able to reference them for future conversations. And so students, that's definitely a great best practice to be able to take. So
well, Ashley saying that just reminded me of a story. Ashley, I don't even know if you know this, but you inspired somebody else to do this. So for those that don't know, Ashley hosts a podcast. I think it's called Your Mom, right? Your Mom?
That is correct.
So Ashley just launched this podcast, and it was probably about 6 months ago. And Ashley's partner, Lisa McCaffrey, reached out to me out of the blue. I've never met Lisa, and I'm assuming it's because she was following your Google Doc trick. She reached out to me. She's like, Seth, I got your information from a friend of a friend. I know that you work in podcasting at NBC. I would love to pick your brain about podcasting because I'm thinking about launching this podcast. And I thought that was so cool. I mean, here she is, Christian McCaffrey's mom. Like, she doesn't have to, she could have just, she didn't need, this is to networking authentically. Like, she didn't need to reach out to me, but she was vulnerable, put herself out there, reached out to me and said, Seth, can I pick your brain on podcasting? And then to Ashley's point, she must have made a note or two about our conversation, because then a couple of weeks later, she's like, hey, we're talking to this network. What do you think we should do here? Sent me an episode and kind of kept following up. And I was just so impressed that somebody in her position was being aggressive in networking. And it's kind of made, Ashley's podcast even better, that she's not just kind of phoning it in, but she's actually getting these amazing guests and really putting herself into it.
Okay, I just have to say, I feel so silly because you're the Seth. Like, this is amazing. I had not made that connection in my brain. Yeah, she, of all of the advice that both of us got when we first launched, yours was incredibly helpful and poignant. So it's great to meet you and see you.
Likewise.
That's awesome. You're wonderful. You were wonderful to her, and it's been a great journey over these last 6 months, no doubt about it.
Terrific.
And Thomas, if you think that I'm not going to follow up with you, Thomas, you're sorely mistaken.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was thinking about Thomas when you were talking about the podcast. I know that's like music to Thomas's ears.
I'm here.
We're bringing all the NFL moms together.
So Dan or Kevin, anything that you want to add before we move on? I'm going to take student questions, but Kevin or Dan or Derek, anything else to add before we move on?
I think I just wanted to also just touch on like the importance that networking via social platforms can offer. I was not the bravest networker for in-person events and meetups and things like that. And I think when I was starting out, I found a little more comfort in going to online communities, especially as someone with a social media background in my current career. I saw a lot of value in being part of, communities on Twitter, communities on LinkedIn. And I think regardless of the area you're looking to kind of break into, there is a community or a niche for that, especially if you're looking to kind of get into social media, digital media, a creative role. I think those online communities have really provided a place for, people to enter the conversation, share your own thoughts and work, reach out, and also stay consistently active there. And I think, I can count the number of people that we've hired or brought on at MLS because they reached out via DM or because they shared their work and we flagged it, thought it was great, got in touch. So Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, those avenues have opened up opportunities, not only for myself, but as somebody at MLS in a position to bring people on for projects. We found a lot of great people via those methods. So yeah, staying active in those online communities, paralleling that with in-person events and in-person meetups, has really allowed me to strengthen relationships, get my foot in the door for my first internship at MLS, which is 8 years later led to my current role as director. And also just ease into networking for those who may not be comfortable or as comfortable yet with the in-person events. And you can kind of strengthen both sides of it as you go. and kind of bring things full circle. So just want to advocate for, social platforms, not only LinkedIn, but Twitter and Instagram, especially, as other places to network efficiently.
Dan, thank you for sharing that. And obviously, I know you have a bias towards social because of your job, but that's such an obvious one too. And as students, they're on social, but that's a wonderful place and opportunity to be able to network effectively. And so, before we move on, I'm going to give Ben or Derek an opportunity to chime in if you guys have anything you want to add to what's been shared already.
Ron,
Go ahead.
Nope, after you.
I think one thing for me is just understanding that, you have meetings and calls and things you're going to set with, someone that you're doing research on and preparing for and all that. But I think there's also sort of a sentiment of being always networking when you're talking with folks, and having that mindset of there's always a little bit of a interview to anything that you do, because I can't tell you how many conversations I've been having, for example, that it's not somebody that I directly work with or need something from, but you're just having a great conversation. You iterate your vision or, what you're interested in. They say, oh, I have somebody that I'd love for you to talk to, or that would be great to talk to. So just having that mindset of there's always, something kind of going on behind the scenes. So put your best foot forward, speaking to everything that everyone's already said and being authentic and all that. But, just it comes from all kinds of different places. And it is so small that there's people that know other people, and you're going to tap into that up to however many degrees of separation. So, be a great person and treat everybody, with respect. And, I think you just never know who's out there, who's listening, or who you're even talking to at times. So it's always on sort of mentality.
That's terrific advice, Derek. And it's going to always be networking too. But yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, just you never know where your conversations, just your, casual conversations, where they'll lead, where those opportunities come from. Just like I said, just being on and being prepared. Terrific. Ben, I think you had something you wanted to add as well.
Yeah, I was going to follow up to what Dan pointed out, which is I think if the issue is, and it can be intimidating to network, is if the issue is intimidating bravely and having confidence to do it, find what works for you. Some people are better at the online. Some people are better at sending an email in advance versus walking up to somebody at a conference. I've known people that have networked with me that are really good at the shotgun approach, and they're machines about it. They say, my goal in 2021 was to have 200 networking calls, and that works really well for them. It probably doesn't work that well for me. I tend to be a little bit more direct and a little bit more reserved with stuff like that. But I think about the tools that are available now that weren't around 20 years ago when I was doing it, and LinkedIn, or even like a panel like this, like you get the information ahead of time. I was able to look and see who are the other panelists, kind of get to know them a little bit, learn a little bit about their backgrounds. But I think about stuff like, no offense to like Thomas, I've seen a million NFL games, but I've never been to an MLS soccer game. And so there'll be for doing this panel, I'll probably pay attention to an MLS soccer game, and I'll follow up with Dan because of it. And that's something that never would have happened. And now Dan and I'll have a connection, and it's something that exposed me to something. So it's that type of, that's what works for me, right? As opposed to walking up to somebody at an in-person event. And I think that's helped me to network a bit more confident, a bit more brave, and probably a bit more authentically than if I was trying to force myself to go up to people. And so I think for any of the kind of the younger folks like listening in, find what works for you and what you're comfortable with, and start there. And then you'll slowly grow what you're comfortable with as you get a little better at it, get a little more comfortable with it. And then, when you're our age, you can do panels like this and not even sweat about it.
Ben, that is fantastic advice. I just love that too. Do what works for you, because there are all kinds of ways you can network. And when I'm talking to students about networking, I try to be mindful that everyone has different personalities. Everyone has different comfort levels with networking, but you're just finding what works best for you. And that goes back to being authentic as you network too. So thank you so much for just reminding us about that. All right,
Ron, I look out behind my web. I've got a nice view of a parking lot, and it just reminds me, we all took a different car to work today, right? So, and everybody took a different path to get to where they are, and that's okay. That's what works. So,
yeah, great point. All right, so at this point, I want to take maybe at least 1 or 2 questions from our students. And so students, if you have not done so already, feel free to put some questions in the chat, or if you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question audibly, you're more than welcome to do so. But our panelists have put out a lot of great information. And as you're putting questions out, let me just do a quick recap of some of the things that were shared recently. But obviously, starting with Ben, finding what works for you, always be networking, be on, network via social platforms, checking in with people, just seeing how they're doing. And, certainly as Ashley mentioned, taking notes from your conversations that you can reference later for future conversations. Wishing people Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, always reaching out, not just reaching out just when you want something. And then just constantly seeing relationships as a long-term thing. So a lot of great information. So students, what questions do you have? Let's see, what do we have in the chat? So let's look at, okay, we have some good ones coming in. Let's start with Christopher Dean Jimenez. So Christopher asks, what's a good way to transition from personal talk to business talk? Interesting question. Anyone have advice on Ashley?
Yeah, I was just going to say it is an interesting question. And I think what I would say, Christopher, is if the personal talk is good, you don't worry about the business talk will come. The way that I got my job at the Pac-12 network was total. I mean, it was a personal connection that I made. The agent who I had at the time basically begged, borrowed, and pled the woman, Kristen Bredis, who was the hiring manager for talent before the Pac-12 network launched. And I was in town in San Francisco, and she said, my agent said, please meet with her. She didn't really want to. She was like, we don't know who we're going to hire. We've got all these different, people reaching out. She's a local news girl in Indianapolis. Like, what? I don't want to meet her. And he finally convinced her. And I go and I sit down with Kristen. So I'm nervous because I kind of know that she pushed back on it. And I want it to be this perfect meeting. And essentially, I just started asking her a couple of questions, and we found a common connection, which is, like the old name game of we had a mutual friend. And we ended up talking about her and both of our paths for about an hour and a half. And all of a sudden we get to the end and I've been there for an hour and a half, and she's like, oh, shoot, I should probably tell you about like the vision for the 7 networks and how we're going to do this and when we're launching. And it was 5 minutes of that. And then we go to the elevator and she gives me a big hug and I say goodbye, and I'm walking to the car and I'm like, I have no idea if that was the worst meeting of all time because I didn't get to, or if it was the best because we made a genuine, like I felt connected to her. When she gave me a hug at the end, I just thought, okay. And it turned out I was about to take a job in Washington, D.C. Because they were still trying to figure out some things on their end, but they came in at the 11th hour and made an offer. And I've been here, since launch for the last 10 and a half years, which is hard to believe. So the business talk will come if someone that you are networking with likes you and you can create that like real relationship. Because here's the other secret, like what makes a career fun are the people that you get to genuinely be friends with and work with. Like by far the best part of my job. It's so awesome getting to go to sporting events and meeting all these great people, but it is the people and those colleagues that you get to connect with. So don't lose sight of that. It's being around good people is key, and connecting and making genuine human connection is so critical. The one other thing that I just want to add, and I know I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to just like real talk the women who are on this panel and tell you that it is different networking as a young woman than it is a young man. And I don't want to sugarcoat that and tell you that you can act the exact same way and do all the same things. But the advice that I would have, because I struggled with it coming up, asking somebody for their phone number, or will you go to lunch with me? Or can we go get a cup of coffee? It is different coming from a guy to a guy than it is from a woman to a man. And that's just what it is. But the way that I finally, my advice for you on that is don't let it be a thing. I totally let it be a thing because I was nervous that, oh, I don't want them to think this or that. Let it go. Let it go. As soon as I was engaged and married, all of a sudden I realized that I stopped worrying about it. And then I look back and I'm like, yeah, there are going to be people who might try and take advantage and maybe want to turn a networking coffee date into an actual date. You'll know those people from a mile away and you don't need to network with them anymore. So I wanted to say that to the women, particularly on this call, because it is something that is real that no one really talks about. It's different networking as a woman, but just know that it's you, and it's get that out of your head, because the faster that you can get that out of your head, the better and more successful you'll be at being able to make real human connections. So
Ashley, thank you so much for that. I appreciate you bringing that to light. That needed to be said. So thank you for that. So I see we have a couple hands raised. I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. So Amari Jackson, I saw that you had your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question?
Yes, hello to all the panelists. My name is Amari Jackson. My question is more so directed to Ashley, to be exact. I just graduated with my degree in broadcast journalism, so I'm on that path of figuring out what exactly works for me and what would be the best thing to do. So I do want to get in the role of being a sports host, sports reporter, moving in the end. So would you say going into news first, which I see that you did, would you say that really helped on your path to going into sports media and even just, being successful in what you do?
Well, first and foremost, Amari, I will give you my email address and we should set up a time to talk. I'd be happy to chat with you about all of those things. But I think the reality is it's a totally different world than it was when I first, got into the business 15 years ago. That was the path. Like you started in local news and you worked your way up and it's different now. And it's because it was my path. I was so thankful for all of those small markets that I worked in, because you're going to screw up, you're going to make mistakes. You think you know things and you don't, and you get in these situations, and it is so much better to be in a small market and to be able to learn all of that. That said, there are people who make jumps now that are not what they used to be. And so whether it's through podcasting, YouTube, like you can be your own content creator in a way that you never could 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I've got plenty of thoughts on that, but to me, saying yes to casting a wide net, both in local and regional and wherever else you can apply that you think you can be taken seriously, go apply and see what happens. That's what I would say, cast a wide net. But I'll leave my email in the chat and please follow up with me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amari. Appreciate the question. So folks, we're going to, I'm going to turn it back over to our panel because we're almost at time. I want to make sure our panelists have enough time to give some parting remarks. So we covered a lot. And thank you, folks, for all of the wonderful insights you shared about networking so far. So as we wrap up, is there anything else that you think our students really should know about networking that hasn't been said?
I have just one thing I was going to share that I was going to mention earlier and I forgot. Sure. Is as you start to develop, your circles and your connections, is to continue to use those connections. And the reason why I say that is like if I've had different people reach out to me. Sometimes I'm busy and I'll have to, delay meeting or speaking with somebody for a week or a couple of weeks. But if I have a friend reach out to me and say, hey, do me a favor and, take some time or carve some time out to meet with this person, I will always, try that much harder. So I think using your own connections to then put you in touch with the right people, or your own connections to put in a good word for you with other people. I think that is, you're that much more trusted at the onset. And so I think, continue as you expand your relationship, don't be afraid to tap into those contacts that you've already established.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I think that's so important to remember too, because, oftentimes we think about cold networking, but yeah, start with the folks your family members, your mentors, your professors, and they can help you. And that works a little bit more effectively because there's that trust there. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to chime in with their final piece of advice about networking? Anything that hasn't been covered already?
Hey, Ron, I'll follow just maybe for the folks that aren't on the panel, maybe in the audience is, man, one day, like just remember how you feel today. Man, one day you'll be established in your careers and somebody's going to reach out to you for advice and networking career, or they're going to ask you to be on a panel and, hey, you're going to be really busy, but you need to do it. Remember how Ashley's going to take time with somebody, Matt takes time with somebody, and remember how that made you, remember how it felt when somebody didn't respond. And so when you get the opportunity to kind of pay it forward 15, 10, 20 years from now, man, please do us all a favor and be a resource for maybe the next generation of students coming along.
Bless you for that, Ben.
Each one teach one. One quick point, and Derek was talking earlier, made me think about it. We're talking about networking and meeting people and being in person and conversations, but be nice, be kind, because we're talking about in person, but you want to be that person where if you connect with someone and you're not in the room, that they're mentioning your name because of who you are and how you carry yourself and their relationship. So it's okay to be nice and be kind. I always think about when Conan O'Brien signed off of The Late Show, when he got booted off the show, and I'll never forget, he said, "It's okay to be kind. You can be successful and be kind." So I'm big on that. So I just implore you in all the relationships you're having and networking is be kind, be nice, be yourself, and be real, because again, you want to be that person if you're not in the room that they say, "Oh, Amari, yep, I know her. I know who she is. I know what she's about." So your name's going to get brought up. That goes a long way. So it's not just how you are in that person's presence. It's just generally how you carry yourself that you should just, be nice, be kind.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you for that. And I can tell you that my wife's in the other room. I can tell you that she and I are both feeling the same way about that, see, because we both think that kindness and just being nice is underrated. And so thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to chime in with final words of advice about networking before we wrap up?
Yeah, just going off of what Thomas said, just, nice congratulations. Like, hey, Derek, I saw you sign this hockey player. Congratulations. Hey, Seth, I saw you launch this new podcast. Congrats. Hey, Ashley, watched the USC game and you were on it, whatever it is. Just a little quick note, like, you're not asking for anything. Just, hey, I see you. I'm paying attention. Like, that goes a long way.
Yeah, Seth, thank you. And students, I want you to pay attention to what Seth's been doing. This is textbook, someone who knows how to research, who knows how to learn more about people and to be able to parlay that into a conversation. And so, Seth, thank you for giving that example to our students. All right. Anybody else want to chime in with any final thoughts on networking?
Yeah, one final thing for me is that, inevitably you're going to need, or ask somebody for help at some point. And I think the notion of like somebody kind of has to go first when it comes to doing favors or making intros. So if there's anything that you can do to initiate that in good faith, to show like, hey, I don't need anything right now, but I'm willing to help you, not knowing necessarily if it's going to lead to anything. That's been really huge in our world as well, just because there's a lot of personalities around here that say, well, why would I help them unless they've done anything for me first? Mm-hmm. It kind of takes somebody to go first. And if you can put some good faith out there, generally it does get returned. So, it's the long game with respect to all of this.
Great point, Derek. Thank you for sharing that. Somebody has to go first, and I appreciate that. All right. Anything else?
I would just add to, and this isn't so much a networking thing as much as I like to tell young folks that are trying to get into sports is as important it is to want to know what you want to do, or to know what you want to do. It's also important to know what you don't want to do, and asking those right questions. I can't tell you how much time I wasted in my early 20s because I didn't really have a plan or a vision, or I didn't ask the right questions. And then I would start a job and 6 months into it and be like, this is awful. So, really just asking those right questions when you do speak to people while you're networking, and even if they are maybe a little negative, just because you'll get more information out of it, and you may say, hey, you know what, I don't really want to go in that direction because I value work-life balance, and this job looks like it's going to be all work, or a lot of travel, or whatever the case may be. So that's kind of my final thought on that.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for sharing that.
Can I add one more thing to Kevin's point that I wish someone had told me when I was just getting out of college and in my 20s? Because it's a really hard, confusing time. And your entire life up to this point, you've had, one step in front of the other. You've always known the next thing that you were supposed to be doing. And then they just like release you to the world. And I think that transition from college or grad school into the professional working life is so much harder than we actually, I think, give credence to. So it's okay. Like if you guys don't know exactly what you want to do, or if you're not on that path. I was done with grad school and I was working overnights as an assignment editor in Albany, New York, making $20,000 a year. And I'm thinking like, is this the path? Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And as I look back, all of those jobs that I had along the way, and knowing that your first job is not going to be your last job. Mm-hmm. And you have to figure out, to Kevin's point, what is it that you like? What is it that you're passionate about? What do you love? And chase those things. But part of it is working your way up. And so starting at the ground floor and knowing that, you know, you're going to put in the time and the effort, and maybe you can't see the fruits of the results right away. It is the long game. So just put in the work. I promise you it will pay off. And just have some patience, and also have some patience and grace for yourself, because you shouldn't have it all figured out. Because if you did, the people who think that they have it figured out in their 20s, I'm realizing now as I'm in my 40s, like I knew so much less than I thought that I did back then. So give yourselves a break and just keep doing what you're doing, which is connecting with great people and figuring out what makes, what fills your cup.
Terrific.
Thank you, Ron, for putting this together.
Certainly, Ashley, pleasure. And Dan, anything before we wrap up?
I think just stressing the point that Kevin made about knowing what you want to do, but also learning about the things that you may not want to get into or go down. And I think you may be laser focused on a particular position or industry or area, but just going into networking with an open mind, being able and kind of ready and willing to learn from those that you speak to, those who do have the experience and have gone down these roads themselves, I think helping give you a better understanding of the area that you want to work in, and being open to, you know, having a change of thought, having a change of heart. You know, I think it's great to set out with the intentions, but if you limit yourself early on, I think that, you know, you kind of create more obstacles down the line, or maybe don't give yourself the chance to understand or hear from somebody who may have a recommendation that, you know, hey, I want to do this thing, but this is what I like, this is what I'm passionate about. Their recommendation may be, well, maybe this area would be better suited for you because these reasons. So I think having an open mind, first and foremost, just makes it a whole lot better, even if you do have a really particular area that you'd like to get into. But allowing those to recommend things, keeping an open mind throughout the process, I think is key.
Terrific, Dan. Great way to wrap it up. So just a quick recap of some things that we shared too. So continue to use your connections to get connected to others, pay it forward, be nice, be kind, be real, you know, reach out to folks, extend congratulations, a good way with connecting with people. Initiate, you know, be the first to be able to help somebody. As important as it is, know what you want to do, know what you don't want to do. It's okay not to know, and your first job won't be your last job, and then certainly being open-minded too. So great stuff, folks. And so Ashley, Ben, Dan, Derek, Kevin, Matt, and Seth, and Thomas, thank you so much. Your time here is much appreciated. It's not taken for granted. I know you're all very busy. So I thank you for joining this panel to be able to invest in the next talent of our industry. You're doing a real service to the students here. So thank you very much for your time and all the wonderful insights. And I definitely look forward to staying in touch with each and every one of you.